right, take two here. Welcome back to Connor and Coverage right now, just on YouTube. It's second time doing this. Stream crashed because we were streaming on Twitch, so we're just going to go YouTube here. Hopefully it's loading. Hopefully there's no buffering issues. We should be a little bit better about handling that right now. My name is Connor Riley. We touched on this a second ago, but I'll recap everything for you that we have in store tonight. We got to talk to Kirby Smart today. He gave us some interesting tidbits and updates on sort of where Georgia is in regards to spring practice, how things are going in the offseason workouts portion so far. But we also got a chance to talk to a couple of assistant coaches today, a rarity under Kirby Smart. We got to talk to running backs coach DELL McGee, offensive line coach Matt Luke, and wide receivers coach Cortez Hankton, as well. You'll hear from McGee and Luke on this show here tonight. And we're going to touch on a number of different topics. I think the headline here is Todd Monken, what Kirby Smart and Matt Luke had to say about that. I think it was both pretty eye-opening today. We'll touch on DELL McGee a little bit. He made an interesting comparison with Zamir White and James Cook, one I think any knowledgeable Georgia fan has made at some point in the past couple of months. And also why I ultimately think McGee is going to be a head coach somewhere sooner rather than later, at least I hope for his sake, because I think he is more than deserving of it. And then we'll wrap up talking a little bit about cornerback position, transfer portal. Kirby Smart had some more interesting comments to say about that today. Obviously, the big news, DERION, KENDRICK, the Clemson cornerback, dismissed from his team. It is now being reported that he will be entering the transfer portal. There had been the potential that he could head to the NFL supplemental draft, but it looks like he's going to be sticking around in college for another year. And I think if you read very closely between the lines, you can kind of get the sense that maybe Georgia is open to bringing in a player from the transfer portal to fill that need at the cornerback spot. And it's hard to imagine a player like KENDRICK or a player with better credentials than KENDRICK, two-time All-ACC selection, has played in a national championship game, played in a college football playoff game a year ago as a starter, someone who is a very talented cornerback option. Obviously, he was dismissed from Clemson. We'll get into what Dabo Sweeney said about that, but it's hard to imagine someone with better credentials becoming available. So we'll sort of touch on those are our three big main entrees. Obviously, if you have comments and questions, I'm going to do my best to answer them. Hopefully, we are up and running on YouTube right now. Looks like we are, so things hopefully looking a little bit better there. We will dive right in. Our first topic tonight, we are going to talk about Todd Monken and why his second year as an offensive coordinator is worth getting excited about. Kirby Smart and Matt Luke were sort of asked about him today, what this spring means. Kirby Smart joked that about 65% of his roster hasn't gone through a spring practice so far. So obviously this spring is obviously a very big opportunity for this team. And on all the talk about Georgia this offseason and sort of where things go and the potential for improvement, the matchup with Clemson to start the season, is this the year they beat Alabama? I think one thing that's maybe getting a little bit lost here is this Georgia offense is a real chance to improve in year two under Todd Monken. And we'll get to some numbers a little bit later on in the show that sort of show why Georgia might be able and ready to make that leap simply from what we saw from JT Daniels a season ago and what a full offseason might mean. Kirby Smart was asked about that today, about what that looks like, how this spring practice both helps both JT Daniels and I think Todd Monken further establish what this Georgia offense is going to look like next year. I thought it was pretty interesting. Here's what Georgia head coach Kirby Smart had to say about that.
Walkthroughs and things that the NCAA allows us to do right now. It's just the pace with which they're able to do things, install things. You can imagine, last year at this time, it was a whirlwind in terms of trying to figure out, okay, Monken's here. Okay, we've got this guy here, trying to install different things. It was just the pace with which we're doing walkthroughs and being able to do things offensively has been much better. If anything, we're trying to adjust more on defense now to what they're doing because they're a little bit ahead of us where we're a little bit ahead of them last year. So that's good. And JT obviously getting a spring to go through this. I mean, at this time last year, I don't even have a clue what he was.
Yeah. So you hear Kirby explain it there. This time a year ago, Todd Monken was getting ready to go through spring practice that ultimately got canceled and wiped away. JT Daniels, I don't even think he had officially entered the transfer portal yet. And at that point in time, he was still rehabbing a knee injury that he had suffered at the beginning of the 2019 season and had actually had a second surgery on in January of 2020. So he was nowhere near close to being able to compete at a spring practice, much less do so for Georgia because he was still a student at USC at that point in time. So it shows just sort of how far this Georgia offense from a year ago has come and has the potential to look going forward. I thought Matt Luke had maybe the quote of the day in talking about working with Monken, what he has brought to this Georgia team. and ultimately why Georgia is really only just getting started on the offensive side of the ball, and why there's a good chance that Georgia can make a leap in year two, another year of learning under Todd Monken and seeing what he brings to the offense. This is what offensive line coach Matt Luke had to say about working with Todd Monken, learning from Todd Monken, and why I think Georgia is sort of really just getting started on offense here in 2021.
I've really enjoyed being around Coach Monken. Obviously, I've known of him in coaching circles for a long time, but just very impressed with how he kind of sets everything up. He's very, very intelligent. He coaches with passion and energy, and just it's been really, really good to get around that pro style, and I've learned a lot, in the short time that we've been together, and it's only going to get better moving forward. So that's what I'm excited about.
So you hear Luke there say, yeah, he's excited. Monken's brought some great pro style concepts, and pro style has obviously changed quite a bit from, even what it used to be 10 years ago to what it is now, and what you saw at, say, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or the Kansas City Chiefs do in this past Super Bowl. And Matt Luke, he's worked with some pretty good offensive minds before. Phil Longo, sort of an air raid guy up at North Carolina, helping run things with Sam Howell up there. Hugh Freeze, he was the offensive line coach under Freeze when Freeze was really running things at Ole Miss there. He played for David Cutcliffe, another well-regarded offensive mind in college football. So Matt Luke sort of knows what he's talking about when working with great offensive minds, and I think that quote from Luke there talking about Monken speaks really highly about what this Georgia offense might be able to do in this coming season. Obviously, JT Daniels coming back, George Pickens coming back. Georgia's top 7 wide receivers will be back from a year ago. All of their running backs will be back. They do have a little bit to figure out on the offensive line in terms of who plays where and ultimately how it looks out. Luke was a little dodgy today trying to answer that question of, well, where does Jamari Sawyer fit best? What do you think of Project Jones? So where is Warren McClendon going to line up? Ultimately, that is going to have to play itself out this spring, and I think even going into the fall of what that Georgia offensive line will look like, and it wouldn't surprise me if that's being constantly tinkered with, even potentially during the season, as Georgia tries to find the best 5-man offensive line combination. But with Daniels back, with Monken back, the tip of the spear is as sharp as it has ever been under Georgia in terms of an offensive firepower and output. And I want to pull up some numbers here about just last year, even the difference between bringing in Daniels from what Georgia had early on in the season, because I think anyone who's been on social media has seen that the plays were always sort of there. It was just Georgia was unable, whether it be Stetson Bennett or Dwan Mathis, the quarterbacks were just not able to make the throws that were necessary. And if you look at this full screen here that I made, the difference between the Georgia offense with JT Daniels at quarterback and without Daniels in that 4 games to end the season there is pretty stunning. An 11-point increase in points per game, over 100 more yards per game, and then yards per play right there, almost over 2 full yards per play more over the course of a game. And I think that stat's pretty telling there, and that just the difference between going from, Stetson Bennett, Dwan Mathis, what I think we can say was not stellar offensive line, or not offensive line play, what was not stellar quarterback play, to ultimately what Georgia had with JT Daniels. And while the Cincinnati game wasn't great, they were still able to move the ball consistently and pretty well there. So remember those numbers that I had just showed you: 36 points per game, 486 yards, 7.5 yards per play. This next full screen I'm going to show you is what LSU and Alabama have done the past 2 seasons. The first thing that jumps out, points per game, a full 12 points higher from what Georgia was averaging for both those teams. 48.5 and 48.4 for Alabama in 2020 and LSU in 2019. Yards per game, both those teams were over 540 yards per game. Alabama 541 last year, LSU 568. But I think maybe the thing that seems most achievable is that yards per play number. Alabama settled at 7.81, LSU settled in at 7.89. If Georgia can just get a little bit better, and one even example of that is you look last year, even in that Peach Bowl against Cincinnati, there were a couple plays where JT made the right throw, big plays, the 51-yarder to George Pickens and the 55-yarder to Arian Smith. Those are great plays that Georgia just was not making early on in the season. But one area I'd like to see JT get better, and again, he's going to have a full offseason to work with these guys as things continue to look a little bit more normal, as more people get vaccinated, as restrictions get lifted, as they did today in Texas and Mississippi. As things look more normal and JT gets more reps with these receivers, you like to see those 51 and 55-yard plays get turned into 75 and 70-yard touchdowns. And that it increases scoring, because actually I believe on both those drives, Georgia did not end up scoring touchdowns which is, again, that's sort of the whole thing I want to see from Daniels and really Monken in this year, is doing a better job at finishing drives, fewer field goals, and obviously more points there. So with Monken back for another year, with Daniels back for another year, I think it's going to be a real boost for this Georgia team. And obviously, because we're going to get into the defensive back concerns a little bit later on. But I like where this Georgia team is at right now. And I think maybe one of the underrated things that we all aren't talking enough about is just why this team has the potential to really make a step forward. Obviously, I think a lot of it on offense is going to depend on that offensive line in terms of, are they able to reach that Alabama LSU level? But from everything else they have back there, and from the natural improvements that come from getting a full offseason to work with Todd Monken, to work with JT Daniels, for those two to collaborate together, I think there's a real reason for optimism and excitement around this Georgia offense that, frankly, as great as Kirby Smart has been as a head coach at Georgia, it really just, that has not been there at that point. So I think with Todd Monken, who you see on your screen now, him back for another year is huge. They're going to get a full offseason to work things together, and I think really improve this Georgia team to a point where it might actually end up looking closer to that Alabama and LSU. Now, ultimately, Georgia's going to have to do that on the field, and they'll do it against Clemson in week 1 of the regular season. I don't know if we're going to see, that Alabama team actually, I believe, didn't end up playing Clemson, but that Ohio State team, put 49 points on the Clemson defense in the college football playoff last year. That LSU team put 42 points on that Clemson defense in the national championship game in 2019. So I think we've seen a template there, and obviously Georgia doesn't need to do that week 1, but come the college football playoff, come week 17, or game 15, 14, whenever these two teams potentially meet again, I think that's where you'd like to see this Georgia team ultimately be. So it's going to take a little bit of time for Georgia to really get up there, because even you look at that LSU team, they weren't the high-flying death machine that they were at the end of the season that they were at the beginning. And you could even say the same against Alabama. They only scored 38 points in a week 1 game against Missouri, where we saw what Georgia did to that Missouri team later on in the season, scoring, I believe, 49 points in that win. So obviously it's going to take a little time, but this offseason I think should really help Georgia. Daniels, Monken really put things together, and ultimately I think Luke might end up looking pretty smart for that comment he made about being excited for this team, why it's going to get better on offense, and why things have the potential to improve there. So that's our first segment for the night, why Georgia should be excited about year 2 of Todd Monken, why there's legitimate reasons for optimism. And we sort of lay out the benchmarks of where they need to get to if they want to join those elite Alabama LSU championship teams there. Sort of recapping things here. My name is Connor Riley. You can follow me on Twitter at @KConnorRiley. This is Connor in Coverage. Sort of recapping everything we talk here about Georgia football on Tuesday night. Busy day today. As we've heard, we've already heard from Matt Luke and Kirby Smart. We're going to hear from DELL McGee coming up here in a little bit. Sort of talking about the latest Georgia news, what we've heard, what we're learning. Spring practice. Kirby didn't exactly come out and confirm this today, but it is expected to start March 16th. The Pro Day is expected to be March 17th. G-Day is obviously going to be April 17th. 25% capacity for that. Will not be a full stadium, though I did see today that LSU is looking to move up to 50% for their capacity, so it'll be interesting to see following that where that goes. And ultimately, as things get better in this country, as hopefully hospitalizations and case numbers go down and vaccinations continue to go up, things look a little bit more and more normal as the weeks go by, and hopefully when September 4th rolls around and Clemson plays Georgia, it looks like it did in 2019, where you got a full stadium and Dog Nation is able to be there in Charlotte with people, with fans. So that's what we're hoping for, and that's what we're looking forward to. But for right now, we're going to focus a little bit on what DELL McGee had to say today. And this past hiring cycle, obviously at the NFL level, Eric Bieniemy was a big story, and him once again not becoming a head coach despite his wonderful time as the offensive coordinator at Kansas City for the Kansas City Chiefs. And you've seen some Georgia assistants in recent years, Mel Tucker, Sam Pittman, Shane Beamer. All those guys have been hired to now be head coaches at a Power 5 level. Obviously, Tucker was the defensive coordinator and defensive backs coach before becoming the head coach. Pittman was the offensive line coach before going directly to the Arkansas head coach. And Shane Beamer was a tight ends coach on Georgia's 2016 staff. He then spent some time at Oklahoma and is now the head coach at South Carolina. So Kirby's first staff had quite a few guys who were position coaches that hadn't exactly been thought of as head coaching material go on to become just that at the Power 5 level, no less, not even taking a Group of 5 job, a MAC job, a Sun Belt job before becoming that. And I say all this because we heard from DELL McGee today, And he actually spoke pretty openly and honestly about some of the frustrations of this hiring process, of not just him, but of minority coaches in general. McGee, it was one of the first staffers that Kirby Smart has hired. He is the utmost trust in McGee. He is someone who recruits his position better than just about anybody. You look at the talent Georgia has in its running back room, and Dell McGee has gotten a ton of his top targets and really kept that room stocked. He's developed talent. Nick Chubb, no one thought he would be the NFL running back that he now is. Dell McGee helped get him there. Sony Michel was a first-round pick under McGee's tutelage. DeAndre Swift was the second running back off the board last season, number 35 pick to the Detroit Lions. So he's done a great job of developing talent. He's an excellent recruiter. I think he fits that CEO mold that a lot of teams are looking for. And, he hasn't been a play caller yet, but how often do running back coaches become play callers? And I think McGee is more than qualified, and we'll hear from him right now, just about some of the frustrations of why it is still taking him so long to really ascend to become a head coach, something I think he absolutely should and hopefully one day will be.
I definitely think it's part of timing. I definitely do want to be a head coach, and I don't control that narrative. As you all know, it's definitely a tough deal for minority coaches to get that opportunity. And I do feel like when that opportunity does present itself, for me, or even if it doesn't, I want to be a great ambassador for the next man that's following me, in particular, a man of color, just because of those opportunities just don't present themselves as much. As a whole, I think we're all, disappointed. We understand that it doesn't happen. The opportunities hadn't happened for us as readily, but we don't control that narrative. So until things change from an athletic director standpoint or ownership standpoint, that trend will continue. So it's just my job as a position coach, assistant coach, to do the best job I can. But at the same time, I'm comfortable with where I am, and I understand that I don't have control of who wants to hire a minority coach or not. That's strictly up to that university or NFL organization, and they have to feel comfortable with that.
So, yeah, you hear McGee really be bluntly honest right there and sort of speak about the struggles that minority coaches have had in the path to becoming head coaches. And I'm sure if we ask Kirby Smart about this, and hopefully I will get to in the future at one point, about why McGee would be a great head coach, again, we've talked about the relationships that he builds, the job that he has done at Georgia. He's done everything you could ask. And really, it's kind of interesting to me. Part of me wonders, well, if Brian Harsin hadn't gotten that Auburn job, because, again, for those that remember that coaching search, it was a little off the rails there. The longer it went, the more it seemed like, why not just hire a guy like Dell McGee, a guy who has SEC experience, who played there at Auburn, who knows this landscape, specifically in the Southeastern Conference, better than just about anybody from his time as both an analyst at Auburn and obviously all his time at Georgia. So I think that every year Georgia holds on to Dell McGee, it's a blessing for this program. He absolutely makes it better. But at the same point in time, I think from a human standpoint, I'd love to see McGee get a chance to be a head coach somewhere. I think he does a fantastic job. And one example of that is, in talking about his players, it's so easy to see why guys speak so reverentially of him. Today, he was asked about how he felt about when he heard that Zamir White and James Cook were both going to be returning for another year. And obviously, McGee, he's got a pretty tricky job this year in sort of balancing the carries and figuring out how many carries does Zamir White get, how many touches does James Cook get, how do you put Kendall Milton and Kenny McIntosh into the game plan. But I thought his answer on Zamir White and James Cook coming back was really genuine and showed why so many people like Dell McGee, and ultimately, again, why I one day think he is going to be a head coach, and ultimately I think a very successful head coach at the college level.
It's very similar to the situation when Sony Michel and Nick Chubb came back. I think from a team standpoint, they wanted to do more, and they feel like they're a part of that and part of the success that we can have. I think it's a good situation for our younger running backs and even our younger players because they offer a lot of leadership mentally and physically on how to perform, how to practice, how to take care of their bodies. So it's very comforting to have those guys back.
So, yeah, you see, again, Zamir White, not Zamir White, Nick Chubb and Sony Michel, those are legitimately legends of this Georgia program. And for Dell McGee to have, I think, the presence of mind or the wherewithal to make the comparison for the choice that Cook and White made, I think shows a lot about how he understands this Georgia program and how much those guys meant and ultimately how much White and Cook meant. I hope when they hear that, they understand, and they certainly do, the significance of that comparison there. So, again, I think Dell McGee should be a head coach. He probably should be one already, maybe not at an SEC level, but at a group of 5 level. He was the interim coach at Georgia Southern a few years ago, in seeing that and how players rallied around him after Willie Fritz left to become the Tulane head coach. There were a lot of people on that Georgia Southern team that wanted him to become the head coach. Ultimately, they went and hired Tyson Summers, and that sort of proved to be a poor hire by Georgia Southern there as they very quickly moved on from him. And you wonder if Georgia Southern makes the move to hire Dell McGee, if maybe that program is in a better place instead of where Summers left it. So I think McGee is going to one day be a head coach. It's taken far too long for him to get there. He is more than put in the work at Georgia. You know, if Sam Pittman is able to go from an offensive line coach to being the head coach at Arkansas, I don't see why McGee hasn't been able to make a similar leap from going from a running backs coach to a head coach somewhere, especially when Kirby Smart has made it a point to point out how much he delegates to McGee when he's always not necessarily around the program or he's off visiting recruits as he has been when that is allowed. McGee is the guy that is sort of in charge, the interim, so to speak, and I think that speaks a lot to what Kirby Smart thinks of Dell McGee, and hopefully one day we get to see McGee run a program of his own, and I have no doubt that it would be a successful job. Hopefully Georgia just doesn't have to match up against him. So that's our second topic for tonight. We touched on Todd Monken off the top. We're going Dell McGee second there. Sort of reset things here. My name is Connor Riley. Connor in coverage, answering your questions, talking Georgia football. We've heard from a couple assistant coaches today, which was nice. Talked to Kirby Smart as well. Got a sort of nice little spring preview of where things are, where things stand going forward. Our last topic here is a question I asked Kirby Smart earlier today. The cornerback position. It is kind of a big need. Kirby Smart said potentially anyone on this roster could play cornerback. I guess that hypothetically includes Jordan Davis or JT Daniels, but the reality is there's many people watching this broadcast right now that have starts on the cornerback position for Georgia as there are in that roster. And that's a problem and a concern, especially as Kirby Smart laid out today. The offenses in college football have become more pass happy and just more, the game as a whole has become more geared to offenses. And that puts a bigger burden on that cornerback position. When you also consider how much man-to-man Georgia tends to play, it puts cornerbacks in a really tough spot. And so Georgia's relying on a lot of young, talented, but ultimately unproven guys, and guys like Keely Ringo, Nyland Green, just to name a few, that need to step up and play well and have big springs. But the reality is to expect those guys to step in and be what even Eric Stokes and Tyson Campbell were a season ago is just not realistic. That's why experience is a word you hear come up, and you've heard it come up quite a few times with Kirby Smart when talking about this cornerback position. And it's something I think is going to continue to be heard as we get closer to the start of the season. Kirby was asked about, with the transfer portal, with transfer portal being an option, does that entice you at all? Do you want to go in there and do you want to pull someone out? And I thought, yes, he has made his point very clear on how he feels about the transfer portal. It is needs-based. But I thought if you listen closely here, there's a really interesting point that Kirby Smart sort of makes, especially when you consider the latest news surrounding DERION and KENDRICK. I'm going to let you hear from Smart first, and then we'll talk about sort of what it means with KENDRICK after the fact there. But pay attention, especially what Kirby Smart says here at the end of this clip.
Transfer portal hasn't changed for us. It's not the primary source of finding football players. We want to recruit, develop, and work to get the best football players we possibly can in here. I don't think the guys that come out of the portal have issues or problems. That's not our normal protocol. It's not what we want to build our program based around. It's a need-based deal, and we have needs. Defensive back is a spot that we're thin at. We think we have very capable, good young players at the position. We don't have a lot of experience. So if you get an opportunity to gain experience, which we did the first year we were here, we got Mo Smith, and all of a sudden you got a player that makes your team better almost immediately. So we would not decline the ability to look at an option there. But I don't really know what you mean when you say that, because it's like philosophically, what are you looking for? Well, I want to coach the players we got, because that's the one thing I know that I can impact. I don't control the portal. I have no control over who goes in, and who's in. So I'm focused on the players that we have, getting them better.
So you hear Kirby there. He mentions a couple of things. Obviously, he doesn't want to use the transfer portal to build this team. He's made that clear time and time again. He wants it to be needs-based. When Georgia has a need, that's when it's going to go in. That's why I don't think they're going to go after a guy like an Arik Gilbert, because they just don't have a need at tight end or even really pass catcher right now on this team. But conversely, you look at cornerback, I think it's pretty clear they have a need there, especially when you consider some of the other comments that he had made today. So what does all that mean? And there's the one specific comment I want you to focus in there on. There were two parts there. One, they wouldn't be opposed to going in there, specifically with you look at what Maurice Smith did when he came over from Alabama, a place where he had a playing experience. That team played in national title games, played in big games, and he was a huge factor on that first 2016 team for Georgia, was ultimately their defensive MVP. And then you look at getting guys out of the transfer. They don't hold that as a stigma that guys left their program or for whatever reason that might be. And I found that part really interesting because there was a very talented cornerback, a guy that has great pedigree, big-time experience that entered the transfer portal today, and that is DERION KENDRICK. KENDRICK was a cornerback at Clemson for the past couple of seasons, a 2018 signee. He was a starter for the last two. He was also an all-ACC selection, being second team in 2019 and first team in 2020. He has played a national championship game. He has played in a college football playoff game in both of those seasons. And ultimately, he had gotten dismissed from Clemson. Now, some of you are wondering, and it's fair to wonder, well, why would Georgia go after a player that Clemson had dismissed from their program for whatever reason? And we haven't gotten a whole lot of clarity as to why exactly KENDRICK was dismissed. He was suspended for a game against Pitt earlier in the 2020 season, I should say, for what Dabo Swinney called he had to go in the love shack for whatever that means. Here's what Dabo had to say last night when meeting with reporters at Clemson, speaking about KENDRICK. Really not much to say other than that he's not with us anymore. But also to say I love DK being KENDRICK. Man, he's a young man that I've always loved as a football player. He's got really good heart. He's never been a disrespectful young man or anything like that. Just sometimes there needs to be a change. So you see that quote there. It's not like KENDRICK, to our knowledge so far, has done anything malicious. So you look at the comments there made by Swinney, and you look at the comments made by Smart. Obviously, Georgia is going to have to figure out what it has in Ringo, Kimber, Green, the rest of its secondary, Amir Speed, Darren Branch, anyone that can play corner for them. Because while, yes, bringing in KENDRICK does sort of patch the hole, they've got to develop these guys as well, because if you don't, this turns into a multi-year problem that you have. And ultimately, it starts to snowball, and recruits are going to look, well, if you're bringing in grad transfer guys every year to play, why should I come play for your school if you're just going to use that grad transfer to play over me? So on the one hand, Georgia absolutely has to find a way to develop the cornerbacks that it has on its roster right now. And I think that's why Kirby Smart continues to say that and reiterate that line of thinking. But when you have a player like KENDRICK enter the portal, that is talented. Now, obviously, some will point out that he wasn't great in that game against Ohio State. He gave up a couple of big plays. But I point out that whole Clemson defense wasn't great in that game. And if you want to put one 49-point offensive outburst on one player, okay, but I don't believe KENDRICK was the reason they lost that game. Clemson's defense just got absolutely outplayed. So I think if KENDRICK is available, which he is now, it is reported that he has officially entered the transfer portal. I think that's absolutely someone as Georgia is going to look very long and hard at and try and convince to come play at Georgia. But at the same point in time, while you can try and pencil in KENDRICK until he is here, until he is officially on campus, as we saw with Arik Gilbert, until KENDRICK is on here, scholarship, has place to stay and everything, anything can sort of happen. So Georgia's going to have to continue to develop guys like Keely Ringo, guys like Nyland Green. This spring is going to be huge for them, because even if Georgia does get, a verbal commitment from KENDRICK, he's not going to be able to go through spring drills. He's not going to get here until the summer. So with all that in mind, yes, Georgia should do whatever I think it can to land a player like KENDRICK to help shore up some of the concerns in the secondary. Kirby Smart went on to say today that he doesn't know if they can go too deep in that defensive backfield just because of the attrition that they've had back there, and they're still waiting on some guys, Kamari Lassiter chiefly, to come in and sort of fill the voids and fill the holes there. So they obviously have to focus on that, but they've got room to add to their roster, and KENDRICK really fits the profile of what they want. He's a Power 5 player, guy who's played in big-time games. He's not going to be around for long. He's got 1 year of eligibility. He's very likely going to try and enter the NFL draft next year. A lot of people were quite frankly surprised that he elected to come back this season. So with all that in mind, KENDRICK makes a lot of sense as a player Georgia would go after. But even if they do, one, KENDRICK doesn't solve their cornerback problem, and two, Georgia's still going to have to develop and find a way to get quite a bit out of whoever ends up being that other starting cornerback there, because with the way offenses are nowadays, you need to have defenders that are capable and able to make plays. Alabama, well, yes, I've been more hardline on this than anyone. Defense doesn't necessarily win you games. I think you look at the impact Patrick Surtain had last year at Alabama, and I'm not saying anyone on Georgia's team right now is at his level, but if you're a dominant cornerback, even DeAndre Baker, I think Eric Stokes, if you're able to shut down one area of the field, it does make things a little bit harder and more difficult for these new offenses to really go after and attack downfield and make the plays that you see Alabama make or LSU make in these past couple of seasons. So those are our three main dishes here. We'll wrap things up here. Got any comments, questions? Ask away. We'll answer these over the next couple of minutes. We'll try and go a good 4 minutes here and try and get you on your way after that. It's a Tuesday here. Weather wasn't great today, but hopefully things continue to get better. There's some vaccine news out there. Spring practice is less than 2 weeks away. G-Day is about 6 weeks away. So we're hopefully getting closer to all that. And we are through the first month of the 2021 year where there is no football, or no college football, I should say. So we've got 1 month down, 6 more months to go, but we're getting there. So if you've got any questions about Georgia, what Kirby Smart had to say today, I'm up on YouTube right now. Go ahead and ask away. Let's see. Now, as usual, the YouTube comment section is a mess. Crow King brings up, Georgia has had uber high expectations since 2018 and beyond. Yeah. Basically, ever since Georgia went to that college football playoff in 2017, the only one they have been to under Kirby Smart, and came as painfully close as they have to winning a national title, the expectation every year has been to get back there. Now, Kirby Smart did talk about today just about those expectations and what they are, and obviously they're aware of them, but they're not out there reinforcing that every day 365, and I think that's the right move or mentality to have, because if you're doing that at a certain point, it just gets tiring, and it gets, I think, easy to lose focus on what that ultimate end goal is if you're so focused on it all the time. So obviously Georgia is aware of that, and ultimately they've got to play up to those standards. And I think if they can win that first game against Clemson, it's going to set things up real nicely for them, I think, to live up to those in 2021. Let's see. And yeah, not a whole lot of comments. We're going to try and hopefully do things properly next week to where we'll just go off on YouTube and hopefully not have any conflicting broadcast there or anything like that. So hopefully we'll be good to go. Crow King, another question. Will the 2022 class be the best Georgia defensive line recruiting ever? Last few years, Georgia has only gotten one proven star, but it looks like Georgia could get 4 or 5 in this class. So yeah, Crow King, I think that's a great question. And I've talked with Jeff about this recently. So who are the best defensive line recruits that Georgia has landed? I think you look at Brenton Cox, and while he played outside linebacker, he was a true defensive end, which is what you see him play at Florida right now. Trayvon Walker comes to mind, and while he hasn't necessarily put up big productions, if you put on the tape and watch him play, it is so clear that he is so talented, and I think going to be a difference maker for an NFL team not too long from now. I think this past year, you look at a guy like Jalen Carter, who sort of lived up to that 5-star reputation as a freshman, and who's someone I'm frankly excited to see get better in the season to come as he becomes more and more established at the college level. Those are all 5-star players, top guys. But, the rest of the guys that from a recruiting standpoint, which is what Crow King is talking about here, because obviously Malik Herring turned out to be a great player. Jordan Davis is a monster. Even a guy like Devontae White has, I think, become a real contributor. From a purely recruiting standpoint, you look at what Georgia has the potential to bring in. They've got Tyree Rest, who is a top 60 recruit right now. You've got Big Bear Alexander, who's a top 100 recruit, and he is only going to continue to go up as he plays more and more football in the state of Texas next year. They are waiting on a couple of announcements. One, Christian Miller, he is set to announce April 4th, but deciding between the final 5 of Georgia, Florida, Indiana, Georgia Tech, and Ohio State. And then and then the big prize, Michael Williams, he's the number, I believe, 41 overall player in the 2022 recruiting class. So he is set to decide on March 15th, 2 weeks from yesterday. And if Georgia can land both those guys, you've got 4 absolute studs, and there's potential to add a 5th name out there. I believe Travis Shaw, a 5-star out of the state of North Carolina, is a name to monitor there. But to go back and answer your question, yeah, I at some point, if they land all 4 of those guys, Crow King, I will tell you, I'm planning to one of my summer articles or summer stories is go back and find the best, positional hauls that Georgia has had in recruiting in certain classes. And I can already tell you this defensive line class, if they land Williams, if they land Miller, it's going to rank right up there with any position group that Georgia has brought in. So I think that's an excellent question. So Crow King, I would say I've been pretty consistent in saying this is the last question, and we'll probably make this the last question of the night, unless something good comes in here at the last minute. I've been on board as saying I do think Kirby's going to be patient with the transfer portal and wait to see who comes open and what comes open. And for me, that has also implied that I think he's going to wait until after spring practice to see who enters and who does what. But I will say with Kendrick, it's hard to imagine someone with better credentials becoming available. Now, sure, there were rumors about Eli Ricks, and there are plenty of other talented cornerbacks out there. But with a guy like Kendrick, who has that national championship experience, that's played in an all-ACC level, that has, quite frankly, a little bit of intel on this Clemson team. And it's how much intel, I don't know, but it's certainly something to monitor as Georgia opens its season against Clemson next year. So having said all that, if Kendrick says he wants to commit tomorrow, I think Georgia should absolutely take his commitment and say, hey, we found the one corner that I think we need, and we want to develop the rest of these guys. But Kendrick is absolutely someone I think who can help this secondary and improve this Georgia team next year, assuming he has his head screwed on straight, as it was sort of implied at Clemson that maybe he didn't there. So hopefully, this Clemson experience humbles him a little bit. And if Georgia's the place where he ultimately ends up, I think he can really help this team down the line and in its secondary, which right now I think, at least from a day one perspective, is its biggest weakness. So thanks to everyone for tuning in tonight. A little slow off the start with technical issues, but that's on my end, not your end. Really appreciate the questions, everyone tuning in. My name is Connor Riley. You can follow me on Twitter at @KConnorRiley. We're going to have a ton of great content throughout the rest of the week. Kirby and the assistant coaches today gave us quite a bit to chew on and work on. Some of the other shows coming up, you've obviously got Jeff's Intel tomorrow night with Before the Hedges. We've got Cover 4. We will be back this Thursday. We've got Brandon Adams every Monday through Friday. And Mike Griffith has a special treat for you guys, a very prominent guest he is going to have on at some point in the near future. So be on the lookout for that on the Dog Nation video channels, Facebook, YouTube, hopefully at some point Twitter and Twitch as well. But just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Hope everyone has a happy Tuesday. We will be back next Tuesday, as hopefully we are every Tuesday from here on out. We've got graphics now. We've got video. Hopefully we're able to get this production thing figured out to where it's not sort of the issues that we had to start tonight. But thanks, everyone, for tuning in. My name's Connor Riley with Dog Nation. Have a great Tuesday night. It was a pleasure getting to talk to you guys.